I am thrilled tonight to welcome our author and his guest interviewer. Mark Rozzo is our featured author tonight, and he is the author of Everybody Thought We Were Crazy, which is him. And he's also contributing editor at Vanity Fair, and he's also written for Los Angeles Times, The New Yorker, The New York Times, Esquire, Vogue, The Wall Street Journal, The Oxford American, The Washington Post, and many others. And he teaches nonfiction writing at Columbia University, so we're very grateful to have you come here and share the story with us. And we're honored to have Gerald Howard join us tonight. He's a retired book editor who was previously an executive editor and vice president at Doubleday. How many years, you told me?
22.
22.
Yeah.
So a veteran. His essays and reviews have appeared in Forum and the New York Times Book Review, Slate, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and other publications. And he's at work on a biography of the famed editor and critic Malcolm Cowley. So hopefully we can welcome you back for that.
It's a date.
Okay, great. Thank you both so much for coming.
Thanks for having us. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah. You want me to start?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
Let's see what
Well,
you got.
first I want to apologize for any DT Max fans out there. He was originally supposed to do this, but the New Yorker, David Remnick, pressed him into service, so I was delighted to be here in his stead. I know Mark through our mutual friend, Duncan Hanna, world's coolest painter guy, man around town, and I had already read this book in galleys, and I just loved it. I mean, it's, as they say, right in my wheelhouse. I'm somebody who was born in 1950, so the 60s were my teen years, even though I didn't get within 2,700 miles of Los Angeles. Let me sell this book to you first.
Yeah.
It's about, we'll get into what it's about. It's about Dennis Hopper and Brooke Hayward in 1960s Los Angeles. It's a portrait of a marriage, a stormy and generative one. At the same time, it's a social history of Los Angeles's hip aristocracy in art and music and film in the 60s. I think it's a meditation on the wreckage that even, or maybe especially, beautiful, talented, privileged people make of their lives. If you've read, you probably have, Fitzgerald's Tender is the Night, that's an awfully good analogy. Just a lot more drugs in this one. And I just want to say it's just a great, big, smart, starry party of a book. Okay? You can dip in anywhere on any page and you will find bold-faced people of all ages doing something interesting and or behaving badly or both. It's just a great book to roam around in, and every page you'll find something that you're glad to have read and learned about. So buy it, you won't be disappointed. Congratulations.
No, thank you, Jay.
So I think we're going to start by, Mark, you want to read a couple of pages just so you can set the stage and get the rhythm of the thing.
Yeah, I'll do that. In fact, I'll just read the first three pages of the book, which sets things up. In a way, I don't think you need any kind of background here. I'll just dip in, and if you can't hear me, just shout. In the fall of 1961, Brooke Hayward was coming down with a case of what she called the Transcontinental Blues. The air of Los Angeles turned brittle as the humidity level descended toward zero. The Santa Ana winds were rasping and harsh. A drought made the Santa Monica Mountains and Bel Air canyons tinder dry. It was the season, as Joan Didion would later write, of suicide and divorce and prickly dread. Pleased though she was about her recent Shoot for Life magazine and her first appearance in a feature film, Brooke felt like an exile. I missed the seasons, New York City, my apartment overlooking the planetarium, the theater, museums, friends, she recalled. In particular, she missed her father, who loathed L.A. almost as much as he loathed his daughter's new husband. He was enraged by the couple's move to the West Coast, just as he'd been by their hasty wedding in New York 3 months before. The tense emotional détente between father and daughter would endure for years. Brooke also missed her little sister. October 18th marked a full year since her death. Now the second anniversary of the death of her mother was approaching too. It was just around Halloween that her new husband vanished. Brooke called all over town, but no one had seen him, or if they had, they weren't telling. On the topic of marriage, he had once said, "I won't be easy to live with. I go off on strange tangents, why I might not even come home for 3 days." 3 days stretched to a week, and there was still no sign of him. It pained Brooke, sitting in their little rental house at the top of Stone Canyon Road in Bel Air, to admit to herself that her father had been right. This man was pure trouble. She decided to move back to New York with Jeffrey and Willie, her toddler sons from her first marriage, and write this second marriage off. It was a disaster. Her missing husband was Dennis Hopper, a fellow actor who had become a teenage movie star in the 1950s after he had appeared in Rebel Without a Cause and Giant. Dennis had a reputation for waywardness, and Brooke never would solve the mystery of his whereabouts that week. But one hot night in early November, under a moonless sky and with the Santa Anas whipping through the eucalyptus trees, Dennis slipped back into the house and got into bed next to Brooke. She pretended not to notice. She let him have it in the morning. Brooke never had the chance. That Monday morning, November 6th, a fire reared up in a patch of brush north of Mulholland Drive. Driven by 50-mile-an-hour gusts, the flames refused to be contained. Brooke was readying the boys for school when she saw a pair of fire trucks racing up Stone Canyon Road. While her husband slept, she watched the man across the street run out of his house and stand there, looking up toward Mulholland Drive through binoculars. He started loading his station wagon. Brooke shook Dennis awake. He opened his eyes to find a scene that was already tipping toward chaos. She, "I'll come back and get you." He, "We gotta save something." Brooke hurried Jeffrey and Willie into the car for their daily ride to the John Thomas Dye School on Chelan Road. They would be safer there. Dennis grabbed a Milton Avery painting, a reclining nude that had belonged to Brooke's parents, off a wall, and, as Brooke was about to pull out of the drive, threw it into the car. "I thought he was nuts," Brooke remembered. There was no time to save the Chinese tapestries that Dennis's father had given them, or the books, or the photo albums, or the toys. What ensued was a day of surreal hell scenes as the Bel Air fire came roaring down the canyon roads, Stradella, Roscommare, Stone Canyon, on its way to consuming more than 6,000 acres in the most destructive conflagration in the region's history. Burning shingles lofted through the air, picture windows crumbled, and carbonized patio furniture floated in swimming pools. Low-flying B-17s buzzed overhead in a rust-orange sky, dropping borate solution. Nearly every fire department in the city was dispatched to Bel Air as the flames climbed 50 feet and the fire jumped from house to house, road to road, canyon to canyon. It swept across Bel Air and Brentwood, incinerating everything in its path at a rate of 13 acres per minute, reaching as far west as Topanga Canyon. The fire department's official report described it as a hurricane of fire. The family's accounts of that traumatic morning are a Gordian knot of conflicting recollections, oft-told stories, and smeared impressions formed amid the calamity that was building on Stone Canyon Road. In the course of the day, Brooke drove through corridors of flame to retrieve the boys and return to Stone Canyon, while Dennis set out on foot, pulling obstinate neighbors out of their burning houses as he made his way down the hill toward Sunset Boulevard. When Brooke made it back to Stone Canyon, she found the scorched street closed to traffic. Her husband was nowhere in sight. In Nathaniel West's novel, The Day of the Locust, a painter toils day and night on an apocalyptic canvas called The Burning of Los Angeles. The Bel Air fire made that cataclysmic vision real. It was responsible for the most devastating property losses in California since the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. And it was responsible for the destruction of Brooke and Dennis's house at the top of Stone Canyon, among the first of nearly 500 houses to burn that day. If you were a believer in omens, it was not the most auspicious beginning for a marriage. But Brooke Hayward and Dennis Hopper, one an ingenue on the upswing and the other a self-sabotaging hard case, were soon to become, as one chronicler noted, the coolest kids in Hollywood.
Well, every book about Los Angeles should begin with a disaster.
Yes, right. I agree, and I loved, basically starting the book with the apocalypse and
working
proceeding
back
from there.
working back from
and
there.
Then escalating.
I should say that we'll go on for about 40-45 minutes, and then will be time for questions at the end. So let's start with your protagonist. Although I see this as a three protagonists in this book, and we'll get to the third.
Okay.
So Dennis Hopper first. I love the dry understatement that Dennis had a reputation for waywardness.
Yeah.
And how. I mean, when we were emailing about it, you mentioned in email that most people mistake him for his character Billy in Easy Rider. There's a lot of Dennis Hopper in that character, but that's not him. So why don't you fill out for us our idea of the real as opposed to the mythical badass Dennis Hopper?
Yeah, I'll try. And it was one thing I loved about working on the book was that I was given access to Dennis's archives at the Hopper Art Trust in LA. It was mainly the repository of his photographs. He took something like 18,000.
We'll talk about those photographs.
Images in the 60s, and they're kept in this extremely nondescript office off of Sunset. It's basically Sunset Plaza, if anybody knows LA. But also in there's some goodies, including old yearbooks, MASH notes, the occasional letter, film treatments that for movies that never got made, the baby book that his mother Marjorie kept, those things that most mothers keep and they seem to just peter out after the third grade, but with the kooky sayings and the kindergarten art projects and the cute photographs and all of that, and in getting into all of that material, as well as some of the archival stuff that I found at the public library and other places, felt like I was able to start to put together a portrait of Dennis that felt a little different and new, at least to me. And by way of background, Dennis came from Dodge City, Kansas, and then in his teen years, his family moved to the suburbs of San Francisco. I mean, forever Dennis liked to pass himself off as a Kansas farm boy, which wasn't exactly the case. His grandparents farmed about 1 billion acres of wheat near Garden City, Kansas. That area of Kansas being made famous by Truman Capote with In Cold Blood, and in fact the Hopper family
knew the Clutters?
They did,
Yeah.
and Dennis and his little brother David bought their sheepdogs from the Clutter family, who were the victims of a quadruple homicide in 1959, made famous by Capote. But Dennis was this, he did have this maverick spirit. He did have this insatiable curiosity and enthusiasm, and this polyglot approach to life. When he was a teenager, he got deeply into acting and became this accomplished Shakespearean.
Yeah,
by the time he was graduating from high school.
There's a fact
people
you didn't
don't
know.
really, yeah, they don't, because you think of him as like the method guy following in the footsteps of Dean. I think
Because he was in, he had a significant role in Rebel Without a Cause.
Yeah, it was his first role in Hollywood. He appeared in something called Medic as an 18-year-old, where he played an epileptic, and in order to get that part, he faked a seizure while waiting to go in for his audition that freaked everyone out so badly that he got the part. And then 5 days later, he had every studio in Hollywood knocking, calling his agent to try to get him signed. So he signed with Warner Brothers at age 18, and in part because Nicholas Ray was working then on getting Rebel Without a Cause off the ground, and they needed young, interesting actors to appear in this. So Dennis's part in Rebel Without a Cause wasn't huge, but there was something kind of indelible about it. Dennis always had this way, regardless of what the part was, of being noticed, and he did, playing Goon in that movie. Dennis appears in that and in Giant back to back, 2 films with James Dean, and we can talk about that relationship later. But
he sabotaged his career.
He does, and the thing about Dennis Hopper is that he is coming, really kind of like a rocket into the atmosphere of Hollywood as an 18-year-old. People are talking about him like he's going to be the next, not only James Dean, but next Montgomery Clift, the next Marlon Brando. And then things don't go so well after that. He becomes frustrated. He would describe himself as having been blackballed from Hollywood after working on a movie with the director Henry Hathaway called From Hell to Texas, right, in 58, 59. And Dennis always claimed it was because they had this standoff that went on for 86 takes.
86 takes?
Yeah, and so basically, Dennis liked to describe himself as kind of being broken on the wheel of Hollywood, the care of this martinet director who wanted to do it his way. Dennis wanted to do it his sort of methody way. We kind of skipped the whole part about how he kind of chucked the Shakespeare aside and went deep for method acting, as he would do in the 50s. Henry Hathaway's recollections were different, which I dug up in the rare manuscripts library at Columbia, where Hathaway said, "Oh my God, I've been made into a villain. I can't escape this thing," because Dennis keeps telling people that I blackballed him from Hollywood and destroyed his career. It wasn't 86 takes. It was more like 5 or 6, and I just wanted him to stand still and just say something like, "Hey, should we go over there now?" But he wanted to turn it into like this cinematic moment, and it made Hathaway absolutely bonkers. So
but it certainly got him. He didn't make any movies after that, and so I watched a lot of television in the 60s, and as I was reading, I think, oh yeah, he was in Combat.
Yeah,
that's a great role. All these black and white television.
Surfside 6.
Which wasn't too bad, but television had no prestige, so.
Oh yeah. So, and that's kind of skipping ahead in a way too, but we might as well because we're hitting it now. First of all, Dennis did appear in some movies, but they were not at the level of Giant or Rebel Without a Cause. That was frustrating. And then in order to pay the bills, he was taking all these television roles, and at a certain point, this is getting into later when he's with Brooke, and Dennis is turning into this photographer who has his work all over the place, Art Forum, Vogue, gallery announcements, album covers. At that time, he was showing up, on call, on the set of Petticoat Junction, and that juxtaposition was must have been so.
His brain must have just gone.
Yeah. Here's a guy who so wants to be an artist and considered an artist, and to be an artist in Hollywood, which in the early '60s was not an
oxymoron
thing. Yeah, impossible to be. But that was crushing. But
well, let's get Brooke on stage then. So they met kind of uncute.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you can imagine it, they were acting on Broadway on a play that was made from Mandingo.
Yeah.
Mandingo. what were they thinking of? But anyway, and
It wasn't their idea, but
Yeah, well, it was
this
work,
is
but-
both for both of them.
No, I didn't. I mean,
Yeah.
whoever.
Oh,
did this,
whoever, yeah.
Whoever put that travesty on, and it was like Brooke Hayward is. There's a line in there. Somebody said, if you didn't fall in love with her immediately, there was something wrong with you.
I like that line. I think
something-
it was. You know, anyone who doesn't develop a crush has no soul.
Right. Okay, that's better. But anyway, he said, "I'm going to marry you now." But she was to those. She's much less well known than Hopper. She was readers of a certain age will remember her best-selling memoir Haywire from the '70s. It was a certified classic in the literature of Hollywood. She was gorgeous. She was talented, and a certified member of the film aristocracy. There's real tragedy in her life. So tell us about her and about their marriage, alliance, misalliance, whatever it was.
So, you know, if Dennis was this Hollywood maverick and over time kind of became the ultimate Hollywood maverick in a way, Brooke was very much a Hollywood royal. She was the daughter of Margaret Sullivan,
With an A, S-U-L-L-A.
Yeah, Sullivan with an A, as Ogden Nash put it. Who, you know, starred in Shop Around the Corner and other films, was nominated for an Oscar. And her father was Leland Hayward, who was, can you call him the first Hollywood super agent?
Yeah, I
maybe.
think you can.
And, you know, he worked with people like Henry Fonda, who just happened to be Margaret Sullivan's husband at one point, before Leland. And Jimmy Stewart, Joshua Logan, Katharine Hepburn, Ernest Hemingway, etc. So she grows up in this very gilded Hollywood environment. The family is famous to us now, you know, in part because of Haywire, which put a spotlight on the tragedy of the family. There was suicides and full of broken promises and emotional frigidity and this peripatetic bicoastal existence that they had going back and forth. You know, this 1960 is really the horrible year for Brooke, where on New Year's Day, Margaret Sullivan dies in apparent, I guess I would say, accidental suicide by barbiturates poisoning. And then about 10 months later, her little sister Bridget, who she adored, ended her life the same way.
Meanwhile, her brother had
Bill
spent time
Hayward,
with not Austin Riggs, the managers.
Managers, yeah.
Right.
So her little brother Bill, who was always pretty wild, is spending a lot of time in the late 50s at Meningers. And Leland, the father, is going through he's bouncing from marriage to marriage. Her parents divorced in the 40s. Leland Hayward then married Slim Keith,
right.
and then married Pamela Churchill, who was really not the greatest stepmom to have, who would later become
To know her is to
ambassador.
dislike her.
Yeah,
Really.
yeah. So, Brooke gets married very young. At 19, drops out of Vassar, has 2 kids. She's living in Connecticut. And
She married the writer and finance guy Michael Thomas, which might be a name some people.
Yeah,
know.
Michael Thomas in the 50s was studying to be a curator. His passion was art, and he became a Wall Street guy, which I think he hated, and then ultimately a novelist and writer, very biting, satiric. Brooke, and I guess maybe to back up 1 second, Brooke's best friend growing up was Jane Fonda. They were really quite a duo, and the Haywards and the Fondas were almost like one extended family. Peter Fonda told Brooke when she was working on Haywire, and I was able to go back and look at all of her original interviews for that book, he said something like, all my life I felt like a planet traveling between these 2 solar systems, that of the Haywards, that of the Fondas, you know. and the Hayward kids and the Fonda kids were always playing together and getting into trouble. Brooke was the oldest, kind of the ringleader. They were, setting fires and playing with guns and doing crazy stuff. And they always wondered if Margaret and Henry were still in love. I mean, they would be flirty and do these crazy things. So there was a lot of intrigue there and an intense sibling feeling among all of them that they shared, these kids. And Brooke and Jane remained friends throughout the time frame of my book. And one big, I don't know if I would call it a big moment, but at some point in the mid-50s, when they were teenagers, they were both out in LA, and David O. Selznick was driving them around. So if you're Jane Fonda or Brooke Hayward, that's the kind of thing that could happen. David O. Selznick, the producer of Gone with the Wind, the kind of most storied Hollywood producer of them all, he's driving them around.
The rich are not like us.
Yeah, that's right. And David O. comes out with this sentence that the two of them would remember for the rest of their lives, which was something like, Brooke will be the movie star, not Jane.
It could have happened. I mean, Brooke she was on the cover of Life magazine, like 48 or something. Well, I'm sorry, no, sorry, but she was very young, but like when that mattered, then and I've seen and she just really was drop dead.
She was
gorgeous.
about 14, 15 then when Life magazine came out to Connecticut and was shooting the attractive offspring of various Hollywood people, including Margaret
as opposed to the
Sullivan.
unattractive offspring.
And
they were kept out in the back.
So this photographer comes. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the photographer right now, but he takes these pictures of Brooke, who really looks like the Greenwich Wonder Girl in these pictures, and she ends up on the cover of Life magazine, much to her own amazement, because Margaret Sullivan had a way of kind of squashing Brooke down a little bit. Brooke actually sold a novel to a big New York publisher when she was 12 years old, and
a young adult novel.
Yeah, it was about like a horse rider kind of thing. And Margaret Sullivan kind of put the kibosh on that because she felt that maybe Brooke would get attention because she was the daughter of Leland Hayward and Margaret Sullivan. It wouldn't be for the right reasons, all of this. She made it go away.
Yeah,
and that was
thanks, Mom.
crushing for Brooke, as you can imagine. So Brooke was shocked that her mother actually allowed a photographer to come take her picture, and then was flabbergasted that it was on the cover of Life.
So these two magnetic, complicated people come together, and they're married from 61, I think, to 69. I want to ask you about your title. Everybody thought we were crazy. Why did everybody think Dennis and Brooke? And that's a sentence. That's Dennis Hopper who said that at one point. Why did everybody think Dennis and Brooke were crazy? I mean, their marriage spawned the 60s in ultra hip LA, and like the parameters of crazy really changed from 1961 to 69 in Los Angeles. So what flavor of crazy did they personify?
Oh man, so many, really. But I'll tell you the origin of that quote. It comes from a series of interviews that Dennis did around late 66 at their house, 1712 North Crescent Heights, which really becomes like the locus for this book. This house was known as the Prado of Pop. It's where they put all these paintings they collected by the likes of Warhol and Lichtenstein and Rouchet and Stella and Rosenquist and Rauschenberg, all this stuff, mixed with this mad profusion of antique everything that Brooke liked to collect, and they put this together in a way that was really kind of mind
Well,
blowing.
that house is,
But,
as I said, I think that's the third protagonist of this.
Yeah.
Of this book, the house itself.
Right,
We'll-
and we
we'll
can
dive
get
into
we
it.
can get more into that.
Yeah.
But you know, the house was significant enough that you know, a series of interviews were done for radio with Dennis in the house, where he's talking about their art collecting, you know, their involvement in the art world in the early '60s, and he basically says something like, you know, when we bought the first Warhol soup can painting, everybody thought we were crazy, and then when we bought the Liechtenstein cartoon, they really thought we were nuts. So he was talking about the fact that they were supporting this art that at the time, you know, newspaper critics were deriding as being, you know,
Vapid.
Yeah, stupid or whatever it was, that they just fell absolutely madly in love for it, and were able. The amazing thing to me is that they were able to, on a fairly shoestring budget, as semi-employed actors, and there was a little bit of a trust fund there for Brooke, but they could buy these early works and provide early crucial support for these artists who were just coming out of the gate, and to line the walls of their house with this stuff and create this one-of-a-kind atmosphere. And then in the course of the '60s, it just seemed like everybody and anybody came through those doors, and night after night, you had no idea who it would be. You know, like, it was old Hollywood, new Hollywood, the Ferris Gallery, artists, the Warhol crowd, you know, people like Joan Didion and Terry Southern. It could be Ike and Tina Turner. It could be Miles Davis. It could be James Peter Fonda.
That was a piece of news to me, that like Miles Davis and Dennis Hopper were pretty tight with one another. I mean, talk about alpha males.
I know, it's funny. They used to, according to Dennis, you know, asterisk. What is that? They would spar together in the '50s and at a boxing gym, and while they were kind of dancing around each other, Miles would like to psych Dennis out by throwing these like little philosophical barbs and profundities at Dennis, and Dennis just trying to like stay in the ring with Miles and just say, "So what?" And then Miles would say some other crazy thing.
I would give a
It's
lot of money to have seen.
Wouldn't it be?
Have seen
It'd be
that.
great,
I mean,
Can you imagine the boxing poster? It'd be really good. But you know,
okay,
so what? Of course, becomes
that's
very
from,
well known.
Uh,
That's from Kind of Blue.
yeah. But later,
I knew that.
Yeah, no, I discovered later at this weird theater in Taos where Dennis used to live. He had left a bunch of junk behind, all this stuff in boxes, and I got in touch with the person who's living there now, and we're combing through these boxes together, and she was really gamely trying to organize them into an archive. This is just like cast off, forlorn stuff. But I picked up a letter from Miles Davis to Dennis Hopper from '68-ish, maybe going into '69, that was all about the Easy Rider soundtrack. So Dennis had actually contacted Miles to do the soundtrack for Easy Rider, and the letter referred to a cassette that Miles had created of music. Exactly.
Where is that
the
cassette?
cassette is gone, but the letter is just off the wall and terrific. And needless to say, Miles did not do the soundtrack for Easy Rider. He did the soundtrack for Dennis a billion years, 30 years
You
later.
know,
another film.
it was just as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it worked out
It
pretty
came
well.
out okay.
Yeah. So you caught that you have a nice phrase about this 1712 North Crescent Heights. You call it the Error's unofficial living room. You know, to borrow a phrase from Gatsby, there's a lot of Fitzgerald. This is a Fitzgerald update. This book, and everybody came to Brooke and Dennis's. And if you're not feeling unglamorous enough by hearing all this stuff, already, so I just love this. There was a spread in Vogue about the house.
Yeah.
I don't see the date, but it would have been
65.
65.
Yeah.
The text of the article is written by Terry Southern, who was hot as a pistol at that time.
Yeah.
So hot that they put him on the cover of Sgt. Pepper.
Yes.
And I'll read the sentence. This is so Terry. I knew him a bit. The Den Hoppers are tops in their field, he declared. Precisely what their field is by no means certain, except she is a great beauty, uppercase, and he is a kind of mad person, uppercase. But here's the detail. So there's a lot of pictures of the house, and there are very expert captions. They took Joan Didion out of retirement to write the captions. I mean, come on.
Yeah, meaning retirement from Vogue.
Yeah,
Retirement
she'd
from
been an
working with
assistant.
Aline Talmy. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I assume trying to read between the lines that Didion and Dunn had moved out to L.A. at some point the previous year, and she started doing those pieces for Saturday Evening Post, and probably Aline Talmy called and said, Joan, can you please go over there and just give us some captions? Which she did.
Maybe you want to put that in we have the Knopf publisher here. You can put the captions in the next collection of Joan Didion.
Yeah.
I mean, everything.
They're good captions, and of course, Joan Didion
They're
would always say
captions.
that's how she learned how to write, doing that sort of Fabergé egg-like writing exercise that maybe a lot of us learn to do one way or the other.
So the book is about collisions, a lot of cultural collisions, among other things, of different spheres that had previously been separate. And there's one example in there that I was particularly tickled by. There's a wonderful description of a party in 1965 that Jane Fonda and her then husband Roger Vadim threw at the Malibu Beach House, complete with music from this new band, The Byrds. And we're playing at a very high volume. And this is where old Hollywood, as in Henry Fonda et al., get to meet the new Hollywood. So tell us about that party.
Yeah, I loved writing about this party, and in a way, it is. There's an earlier party in the book that Dennis and Brooke throw for Warhol. The first time Warhol comes to California, comes to LA, that's late 1963, and that is just a crazy commingling of people. You have Warhol and Taylor Mead and Gerard Malanga, their retinue in this house, all the art, the antiques. Andy's saying it's like being in an amusement park here. But they also had, Suzanne Plachette and Troy Donahue, the it couple at the time, and Peter Fonda, who Warhol said looked like a preppy mathematician, and they're hanging out with people like Klaus Oldenburg and Ed Ruscha and all the artists, and for Warhol, it was kind of like seeing living pop art, to see these Hollywood creatures, and that was really Warhol's West Coast coming out party, and it was the night before his second Ferris show, the Ferris Gallery show in September of '63. So fast forward 2 years to July 4th, 1965 on Malibu, and there's another party that's also combining these personalities in such an oddball way at Jane and Vadim's rental in Malibu, which Dennis described that Malibu scene in '65 as being like a dream colony. People were smoking a lot of weed, they were drinking nice wine, the kids were playing on the beach. Roddy McDowell made these amazing home movies that you can see on YouTube, which is just so redolent of this. It just feels like California at its sunniest post-war apogee, really. It feels so golden. And the Byrds just then had their huge breakthrough on the Sunset Strip at a moribund old showbiz nightclub called Ciro's, which nobody was going to anymore until they got booked into there spring of '65, and that's one of those ground zero moments for the American counterculture, where you had Hollywood people like Dennis and Brooke there, the Fondas, you had the Ferris artists, and then you had this retinue of the so-called freaks, right? These were
Frank Zappa?
not Frank Zappa, but Carl Franzoni, Vito Palakis, who was an older sculptor. They were the freak dancers. They would show up at Ciro's looking like they had just stepped out of Sherwood Forest and dance very provocatively and kind of freak people out. But it felt like there was a moment, like something significant was happening in the culture there. So Peter Fonda was the one who told Jane, his sister, hey, I think you should hire the Byrds for your party. And Jane had never heard of the Byrds, and it happened to be like about a week after Mr. Tambourine Man came out, they played, and Dennis took a ton of photographs of this event, which most of them have never been published, and in fact at the Hopper Art Trust were all
Send them to me, would you?
mislabeled. Yeah, they were mislabeled.
Listen,
They're
we're
great.
restraining ourselves. We could take the whole hour on the Byrds. We're
Yeah,
both,
no, that's definitely a rabbit hole for both of us. So there's this opaque tent, the Byrds are setting up, and there's people like George Cukor there, and Henry Fonda is roasting a pig in the sand, and Lauren Bacall is there, and then Dennis and Brooke and Peter, the younger crowd, maybe somebody like Russ Tamlin, and then the Sunset Strip freaks all come in because they're on the Byrds bandwagon, and Derek Taylor, who was the very urbane, dandyish, Beatles press secretary, moved to Los Angeles, around that time, and he was working with the Byrds, and he's looking around at this scene, and he's getting worried that something bad might happen, that these different cultures might not meld so much as collide. And he's looking at the freaks, and he can't believe the clothes they're wearing and the way they're moving themselves to this music. And he, described, he's coming from swinging London, by the way, okay? And he's saying, I kind of thought that when you went to someone's house, you should wear a jacket and maybe put on a tie, but like, who are these people? And he is expressing his concern to the Byrds manager, this guy, Jim Dixon, saying like, I don't know if this is going to end well today. And Jim Dixon said, Derek, it's okay. Hollywood is ready for this now. This is going to be all right. And it was all right, despite the fact that Henry Fonda thought the music was way too loud.
Tell us. So Henry Fonda, David Crosby, give it to us.
Well, yeah, how about that for pairing? But no, at a certain point, Chris...
If you don't do it, I'm going to do it.
No, I'll do it, sure. Chris Hillman, who was the bass player in the Byrds, of course, told me, when I asked him about this party, he said, I was standing there at one end of the stage, and I'm playing, and we're having a blast, and I feel somebody tugging at my trouser leg, and I look down, and it's Henry Fonda. And Henry Fonda is saying, can you turn it down, please? It's really loud. And of course, your natural response is to say, yes, of course, right away, because it's Henry Fonda. So then, of course, Chris, it's like a game of telephone trying to get this message across the stage. And the Byrds were notorious for playing at just ear-destroying volume, which is surprising when you think how transcendently beautiful their music was. Chris turns to Dave and relays the message that Henry Fonda, icon, is asking them to just lower the volume, and Crosby's response was basically like, "No way, man, we're not turning down." His response was F that.
Did he say that to Henry Fonda or just to the ambient air?
I think the ambient air and to Chris, and so the volume stayed right where it was, and people danced. Buck Henry, when I asked him about the party, said, yeah, they played Mr. Tambourine Man over and over, and we just danced all day. and it was a
It
beautiful
just
thing.
sounds like heaven to me.
Yeah.
I gotta say. So there's the Woody Allenish idea that people on the East Coast have had of Los Angeles as a vapid culture.
Yeah.
Is really long past its sell-by date, of course. But what I think your book gives you is really a detailed look at the Los Angeles culture that isn't appreciated enough, that it was, as you know, very advanced, especially in terms of art. I mean, Warhol had his big breakthrough in Los Angeles more than in New York, for one thing. And Brooke and Dennis played a big role in this culture, I just think that's one of the strengths of the book, that it expands your mind about what it wasn't just what was going on the Sunset Strip and up in the Laurel Canyon. It was happening in the galleries, and there was an intellectual life that.
Yeah, no, that was interesting to me. I mean, I really got the bug for this period of Los Angeles and trying to do a cultural history about it, because what made Los Angeles at that time really so dynamic was that it felt like there were these three revolutions happening at once. You had this eruption of West Coast art centered mainly at the Ferris Gallery, which is, you know, this gallery on La Cienega Boulevard that now in the rearview mirror is arguably the most famous gallery that ever existed west of Montclair. And then so there's, you know, these West Coast artists are making this new kind of art. They're feeling this frontier spirit, being on the other coast, so far removed from the art world cauldron that is New York City. And of course, New York artists like Warhol and Oldenburg and Rauschenberg, they're all going out there to visit, to kind of feed off this energy, which is so interesting. And then you get the Youthquake scene rolling with the Byrds on Sunset Strip in '65, and that triggers this kind of musical moment of invention and exploration, and America suddenly has its own Beatles, which would be the Byrds at that time, you know, a band with huge artistic ambition at that time, major commercial success. And then ultimately, as the decade rolls on, you have the emergence of the new Hollywood. A new era of really interesting movie making, which Dennis had a huge hand in as the director of Easy Rider, which was the movie that pushed everything into the 70s.
That is the climax in a way of the book. I mean, we could go on. There's a lot in here. We could go on for an hour. But two things. I'd like to finish our conversation before we go to questions. By giving Dennis his due as a photographer. I think it's important that if you look on the New Yorker's website today, you'll find a piece by Mark about a very important photograph that Dennis took called Double Standard, which is a Los Angeles streetscape that was on the cover, eventually cover of a catalog of some Ed Ruscha paintings.
Gallery show.
Yeah. But talk about that photograph and about. I mean, he was like a court photographer, in a way for Los Angeles hip aristocracy. So give us a sense of him.
Well, you know,
why he's like a really important photographer who's not recognized as such.
Well, I guess I would say that it would be very easy to just kind of dismiss Dennis as a dilettante, you know, a Hollywood guy with a camera. But he did create 18,000 images in the 60s, and he was just supernaturally omnipresent during the decade. You know, he was at the Ferris Gallery openings, Warhol's Factory, March on Washington. He was in Selma. Sunset Strip riots, the Watts Rebellion, the Human Being. I mean, he was just everywhere.
Monterey Pop.
Monterey Pop. All that film's lost.
Oh no.
Because Michael McClure gave him too much
Acid?
LSD. But you know, he shot artists and actors and writers and activists, civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King, you know, so he was, you know, and as we mentioned before, he was shooting, you know, his pictures were in Vogue and in Art Forum, so he wasn't exactly a celebrity shutterbug, you know, as I kind of said.
He's not Ron Galella.
Yeah, and as we were saying this, you know, I'm sure there are a lot of Hollywood people who liked taking pictures. Leland Hayward was one of them, and even now they might be quite good, but there's nobody who's anywhere close to being in the universe of that with Dennis Hopper. You know, Wim Wenders said if Dennis had only been a photographer, he'd be one of the great photographers of the 20th century. You know, take that as you will, but there's
a little overstated, but he's awfully good.
But he's awfully good, and there's no doubt that he created this incredible document of the time, and we're really only starting to understand the value of that. A lot of that work, by the way, was lost for the longest time. It was buried just because Dennis's life was so weird, and then he viewed that as just this testament to his failure in the 1960s of, you know, until Easy Rider not being able to get his career together. The fact that this wonderful creative collaboration, romantic relationship, marriage with Brooke had blown apart, that he had blown it, you know, to you know, make it easy, the obligatory Easy Rider reference, and he kind of buried it, and then toward the end of his life, as you know, there were some gallery shows and books of Dennis's photography coming out, and more people were getting interested in what he did. He actually started to see that as maybe being the thing that he would be remembered for, or the creation that would be most lasting was his
I'm going to make a prediction.
photography.
I think this book is going to really increase interest in that aspect of Hopper, and I think there are probably more books of his and shows of his work in the future.
Yeah.
So we could do a lot about Easy Rider. There's one of my favorite sentences in the book, and is about Terry Southern, who was supposed to be the responsible person. And if Terry Southern is the adult in the room, it probably means you're beyond hope.
Right.
But I want to open it up to questions for Mark. If you don't have any, I've got plenty of my own here. But is there anything you'd like to ask him? Go right ahead.
Actually, I'm interested to know if you were able to meet with Brooke, because I think she's still alive.
Yeah, a lot, actually, and that the book really, it would have been difficult to do without her. And I would drive up from New York, where I lived, to Connecticut and visit with Brooke maybe once a month or so for a while. We would invariably go around the corner from her house to this 19th century tavern and have BLTs and iced tea. So BLTs, in my case anyway, played a very important role in the exercise of the craft of biography. But and she would, you know, we would sit there and
give somebody that sandwich, they're just going to spew.
Yeah, making me hungry right now. But yeah, and we would talk, and she would kind of spin out these tales, and at times, you know, she was forthcoming, other times not so. She has a tendency to be Sphinx-like in a way, but sometimes I was flabbergasted at how much she was sharing with me. Sometimes I might bring one of Dennis's photo books, or we'd go back around the corner to her place, and we would look at his pictures, and she would spin out these tales based on what she was seeing on the page. It was like, you know, there'd be a stenographic caption that was 4 words long of you know, the Sunset Strip riots, and then she would be able to kind of go somewhere with that. And I felt very conscious of being on this line between history and memory working on this book, with Dennis having died in 2010. 10, and Brooks still being around. And with this moment in time being at this place where there are a lot of people and some of us in the room who still remember it, and then it's starting to recede in a way. You feel like it's starting to get out of reach. Part of why I felt almost an urgency to do this book. And also I should note that while I was working on the book, I mean, you know, I'd been in touch with Peter Fonda and his people for weeks, months, and then suddenly he died. You know, Bobby Walker then died. Since doing this, Michael Nesmith died, and Michael Thomas. Sorry to get all grim suddenly, but it was like
it's a biographer's hazard, really.
It is, and I know, like, you know, Debbie Applegate, for instance, you know, likes to talk about how she really prefers to work, you know, like with dead people. If I can just say that. I feel like
long-time dead people.
Yeah, I feel like I'm agnostic. I can go either way, but it was interesting to have Brooke in front of me telling me these stories. Dennis not there, feeling that absence, and trying to get to Dennis through the people who knew him, all the archival stuff, and amazingly to me, his little brother David, who still lives out in Taos, who is a steel trap in terms of remembering everything. His mother, in an interview I found in the Gene Stein papers, said that David seems to have a photographic memory, and just talking to him, I could tell there was something to that. And with him, it wasn't BLTs, it was, you know, enchiladas at Taos. But looking across the
East
table
Coast,
at him,
West Coast, yeah.
Yeah, you know, looking at those eyes, you know, those
Opera
blue
eyes,
eyes that came down the maternal line, I guess it was, of that family. I did feel like I was in Dennis's presence a little bit.
Yeah, every biography is its own story, right? About uncovering the past.
Yeah.
Right. Any other?
Did that help?
Yes.
Yeah, and also, you know, I spoke to Brooke last week, and she's
Is she
doing
going to
pretty
do
well.
any interviews in respect to the book?
I don't know. She
Somebody
she
should-
didn't say. I don't know if she wants to, honestly. And the first time I went up to visit Brooke in Connecticut was when I had an idea to do a story about her and Dennis for Vanity Fair in 2017, and their daughter, Marin, suggested that we go up together and we try to talk Brooke into it, that she would play hard to get, which she did. And we had to kind of, I think that I think she likes to play hard to get, but I think she was also concerned that what I wanted to do might be a sort of retelling of the, you know, lurid marital details rather than this cultural history of which she played a central part. And as we got to talking, and we would prompt her saying, like, well, what about that party for Warhol? What about that Oldenburg happening? And what about the Sunset Strip? You know, she could kind of see that this would be a different thing, and she got more into it.
So I don't want to blow your ending.
Don't.
I won't, I promise. But what I will say is that when I was rereading the book today and I got to the end, I swear to God, the tear came to my eye. It was so well done. It's a love story, this book. I mean, pretty stormy one. But so
Yeah.
any other questions? Yeah.
Well, who were the photographers he admired? What did he come out of as a?
It's really he was very not super forthcoming about that. I mean, I know that he loved Robert Frank. He was very into.
He spoke about the decisive moment.
He's talked
right?
about the decisive
So
moment. That's right.
I'm
The
forgetting-
Cartier-Bresson.
Bresson, yeah.
Those would be two, and they're like very obvious. William Claxton was a more direct and kind of hands-on influence. Claxton, who shot a lot of jazz artists and who shot a lot of the Rudy Gernreich fashion stuff in the 60s. His widow, Peggy Moffat, the 60s model, told me that Dennis had this habit, because Dennis was always such a sponge and wanted to be in on everything. When Claxton was shooting something, Dennis would like to stand behind him and just see what Claxton was seeing, and Peggy sort of joked that, you know, Bill probably found that really annoying, but he tolerated that and sort of would pat Dennis on the head, so Dennis could kind of figure things out. And Dennis refused to crop anything that he took. He hated the snapshot aesthetic, but he wanted composed pictures, but he didn't want to crop them. So that's getting back to your decisive moment. He wanted to find that. When I talked to Leon Bing, who was another Gernrich model, she said that, something about how Dennis had this instinct, that photographers are always looking for the right moment to click. And some photographers have it, some don't. She said Dennis never missed. And Brooke also said that, that he had the greatest eye of anyone she'd ever known. That he was just imbued with this, and a lot of their courtship was, again, based on their mutual love for everything visual, for art and photography, sculpture, all that.
So we have time for one more question, if there's anyone out there. Yeah.
Of the living people you interviewed,
Yeah.
who was the most fun or surprising?
Oh God, they were all fun. I just kind of couldn't believe that I was able to talk to people like Jane Fonda or like Roger McGuinn, who was, one of my heroes. Who also, when you talk to Roger McGuinn, he sounds exactly like Roger McGuinn. That happens sometimes, and I mentioned to that, and he said, "I can't impersonate Roger McGuinn," although I have actually, like on
You can
actual
impersonate
recordings.
him with the guitar. By the way, this guy is a rock and roller too. He plays the mean guitar.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
But Roger said, "Oh yeah, people say that about me all the time." It's funny. And Chris Hillman was great. Ed Ruscha was maybe the best of all because, as Michael Nesmith, who was also incredible to talk to, said that yes, Ed Ruscha is the coolest guy in the world. Toby Rafelson, who was married to Bob Rafelson, who made 5 Easy Pieces, and with Bert Schneider created the Monkees and funded Easy Rider. Bob is still alive and out in Colorado, but his wife, Toby, who was a set designer who worked on 5 Easy Pieces and other things, she is approaching 90 and so fully all there and remembers everything and is a great talker. And Irving Blum, that director of the Ferris Gallery, that Cary Grant-esque personality who turned 90 last year, still has that plummy voice and loves to spin tales of the old days. So they were all a blast to talk to. And the kids, I have to say, the children who lived in that house were fantastic. And I loved writing about this house where it had all the art, all the crazy designs, the huge personalities are coming and going, the dinners, the soirees, the parties, and yet it was a family house, with these kids living in it, and telling me stories about the day, a piece of toast went flying across the living room, and hit Roy Lichtenstein's Sinking Sun painting, leaving a butter stain, or Marin, the little girl, Dennis and Brooks' girl, talking about learning how to hula hoop under Ed Ruscha's Standard Station, Amarillo, Texas, an undisputed icon of post-war American art, and Brooke just being like, so kind of blasé about it in a way. I mean, that is a painting, by the way, that would be worth $60 million now. And anyway, so I love being able to almost, tell a story of a sort of post-war suburban family, even though it's a very weird one, living in a very strange house, where the kids actually would occasionally, they were very proud of their house, but as Marin described it, she felt like Marilyn in the Munsters, and they would often go across the street to their friend Tammy's house, where everything was beige, and
avocado refrigerator.
Yeah, and it would just be, this would be a haven of blandness and normalcy for them, and they would just and then they would go back to their crazy house, which was like a stage set.
If there were kids over there, they could have switched,
Right, yeah. I'm not sure how much
There's
Tammy
a
hung
sitcom
out.
for you.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And also, and they had the car, Dennis and Brooke at some point thought like, oh, the car we should get for the family ride should be a yellow checkered cab, it's like the ultimate pop art car. And Brooke would drive the kids to school, and they were just every day, they would roll up to school, and the other kids would be like, taxi, taunting them, and they were scarred for life. But,
So I think our time is up, but I had a lot of fun. I hope you did too.
I did.
I guarantee you, if you buy the book, you won't be sorry. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,